and welcome to Chronically Overdressed. I know it's been a couple of months since I've put out a video, and I do apologize for that. I frankly have been struggling a lot with motivation and inspiration. Oahu is in yet another lockdown. We're coming up on the 2 weeks, and I don't know if it's going to be extended or not. It is absolutely necessary. Our numbers have risen quite substantially, and it's quite scary. So I know it's necessary, but it still makes things really uncomfortable. And that island fever is really setting in. I'm feeling the intensity of just the knowledge that I'm on a very small island and I'm very far away from everything. And there's just nothing to do, nothing to see, nowhere to go. And it gets a little daunting after a while. So I'm struggling with that. But I do want to say thank you to everybody who has reached out to me for your support and just, letting me know that you're there and that you care about me. And I also really appreciate everybody who is giving me ideas for any videos that you want to see. I do want to know what is interesting to you and what you would like to see from me. Sometimes I don't always realize that that something is interesting to anybody else. So I do want to hear that from you guys. So please keep that coming. I really do appreciate it. So one of the things that I hear a lot, or I get asked questions about, is kind of my journey and my history of vintage and where I began on this vintage journey. So that's what we're going to talk about today. So my story begins in the mid-70s. I was born in San Diego, California, and I really have to attribute my love for vintage and just love for the eras of the 30s and 40s to my parents, mostly. Fashion side, definitely my mom. History side, definitely my dad. So my mom was born in the early 40s in Minneapolis. And my dad, or my stepdad, who raised me, he was born in the mid-20s. So there's pretty big age gap between them. And my dad actually served in World War II. He was a Marine and he was wounded in Japan. So I have a personal connection to that era, to that time frame. And although he didn't really talk about his personal experience in the war, especially his experience being wounded, he didn't talk about that until really towards the end of his life. He was always fascinated and very interested in the World War II, in that era. And so I grew up watching documentaries with him and learning firsthand knowledge about what life was like during that time. And so there was that personal connection. And my grandfather also served in World War II. So it was my mother's father. And so I had, both of these men who I greatly admired and loved, that, that were willing to kind of share that part of their lives. And so at an early age, that was just fascinating to me. I really was kind of immersed in the knowledge of those eras. And then my mom, who is quite possibly the most glamorous person I've ever known in my life, she really just set the stage for me as far as an aesthetic. She was always put together. She looked amazing all the time. She wasn't always dressed in vintage, but she did wear a lot of vintage. But she just always presented herself so wonderfully, and I really wanted to emulate that. At a very young age, she would take me shopping at thrift stores and vintage shops. And so it was just kind of a thing that we did together a lot, and I really enjoyed that. So as I got older, it was a normal thing for me. That was my first go-to, was to go to the vintage shops and thrift shops. And, as even then a plus size gal, I just kind of felt the silhouettes of those eras just really fit me so much better than the modern day clothing. And so that was where, it just kind of all clicked. It all kind of came together for me. So I was in high school in the 90s when the swing dance revival began. And so it was actually quite easy to kind of just stroll right in with the retro styles and not get too many looks. So by the time I was, 15 or 16 years old, I was pretty much, full time wearing vintage style. At the time, there wasn't really any reproduction companies that were making vintage style. A couple of companies would come out with retro style clothing that would go along with the swing dance revival. But I was really just I was wearing a lot of vintage, I was wearing thrift store finds, and I was adding in modern pieces, but styling them in a very vintage style. So that was something I learned very, very early on how to do, is just kind of, I had my eye on details and silhouettes that looked like they were from that era. And so I would just put them together and just make it really easy to kind of pull off that vintage retro look. So San Diego had a pretty big pinup and rockabilly scene when I was in high school and just out of high school. And although I never really fit in with that crowd, I was still a part of it. I was a swing dancer, and I would go out regularly to go swing dancing, and so that was really kind of like my first foray into seeing other people dressing in this way. So yeah, for, I guess in my early years, I probably had a more pin-up-y, rockabilly look to myself, just because that's what I saw. That's what was easily and readily available. But I never really felt comfortable with it. It was not really a look that I really wanted. I didn't see any authenticity in it. But that's what was available, and that's what was there. So it was really, once I got into my 20s and 30s and was doing a lot more fashion research, and then once, the internet came around, because, I didn't grow up with the internet, and having access to Pinterest and blogs and Instagram, and seeing all of these other inspirational people that were dressing in this very authentic style, that's really when kind of everything opened up for me. And, by the time I was ready to start my own blog, I feel like I was really on the road to that more authentic style, and that's what I've strived to have ever since then. There is nothing. I don't have anything against pinup or rockabilly for anybody else. It's personally not my style. There's just not an authenticity, especially in the pinup style, that is there for me. I really prefer the very authentic looks of the 30s and 40s. I do like the 50s style on other people. I don't know, I have this thing in my head where I still associate the 50s look with the kind of that rockabilly retro style, and I have a hard time with that. I have a hard time kind of separating those two. And really, my friend Laurence and Sylvain in France, they have the blog Lost in the 50s. They're really the ones that I look to for the most authentic 50s style. And I love everything that they put together. It doesn't they don't have that kind of rockabilly-ish look to them. They have a very authentic look, and I really appreciate that. So I love having them in my life to kind of counteract that that thought process that I have for some reason about the 50s. So yeah, as I got older, being on Pinterest, being on Instagram, I was able to be exposed to so many amazing people, and being able to actually meet a lot of these people has been just a highlight of my life, and knowing them and becoming friends with them. I'll give you a list of some of the people that I just absolutely admire on, especially on Instagram, who serve as daily inspiration for me. And I really do. I utilize, Instagram and Pinterest a lot as my kind of inspiration boards for things. And now we're in a time where reproduction companies are doing amazing things. And being a plus size person, the fact that a lot of these companies are actually making things that fit our bodies, I can't even tell you how just wonderful it is for being a plus size woman in the vintage world to be able to have access to these gorgeous reproduction pieces. I know how hard it is to find vintage, especially in a higher size like myself. I'm about a size 20 in US sizes and a 22 in UK sizes. And I have very few true vintage items that I would be comfortable wearing on a day-to-day basis, because they, some of them are quite fragile. And they're just very expensive too. I understand that. I mean, they're very well made, and they're very, very, very well done, but they can be very expensive. So having a whole wardrobe full of, expensive, very fragile clothing is just, it's not in the cards for me. So I do tend to go more towards the reproduction side of things. And I'm so fortunate that we have these great brands out there now. And I'll do a separate video on some of the, brands that do cater to plus size, and kind of how to put together an outfit from these reproduction companies. But so that's, my evolution has really started when I was about 15 or 16 years old, and I am, as of today, 44 years old. So it's been a long journey, and it's, I've incorporated this style. It's my everyday life. I don't have modern clothing, except for, a couple of workout outfits, which, have kind of dust on them really right now, but that's okay. So I don't, it's just an everyday thing for me. And it really became my full-time life when I was probably about 16 years old. That was when I decided to start doing my hair in vintage, my makeup in vintage, and wearing my clothing in vintage style. And it was just a commitment that felt comfortable for me, and it was how I was able to express my personality and just express who I was. And I've never looked back. It's been a wonderful journey, and of course I've been able to have my blog and my Instagram and my YouTube channel. And through vintage, I have been able to be a part of a really amazing community and meet just the most wonderful people, and have this camaraderie of people who I share more than just a fashion sense with. I find that the people in, at least within my little beautiful bubble of the vintage community, we all very, very much share the same values, and, we all have a lot of the same goals in life. They're incredibly creative people. And they come from all walks of life. And I love that. It's not, to me, it's not just about fashion. It's a whole mindset. And I am so thankful for the vintage community for not only embracing me and bringing me into the fold, but just for being there. There's, like I said, there's an amazing amount of people out there. They're wonderful. They're caring. They are just really true, beautiful souls and beautiful friends that I've been able to find, mostly through social media, to be honest. I've been lucky enough to meet a lot of them in person, but especially now when we're completely separated. Social media has been amazing for me. With the amount of times I move and, being so far away from everybody, social media is really a good lifeline for me. So I just, thank you to the vintage community for being there and for being amazing. So yeah, I'm constantly evolving. I'm constantly, kind of reviving myself and learning as much as I can. And I hope that you will, stay on this journey with me and find something that works really well for you as well. Thank you for joining me on my vintage journey. I hope it was helpful for you. And please let me know if you have any questions at all. I'm happy to answer questions, and I really appreciate you sending me any ideas that you have for what you'd like to see from my channel in the future. And let me know what's interesting to you. All right. Thank you so much. I'll see you soon.